Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Metropolis Radio. Today, we are going back to Screen Rant because they have done a follow up to an article that I made a video on. I think last week, and they're basically comparing all of the post pandemic box office numbers here. While audiences are returning to theaters, the movie box office still took a big pandemic hit. Here's how the post pandemic box office compares. Now we've already taken. Now you can consider this kind of a trifecta, if you will, of videos that I've made just on the post pandemic box office alone. You had the first one, and then I made that video on Black Widow's second week drop off and how movie theaters were blaming Disney Plus. So now this is really coming together, kind of coming full circle, if you get what I mean. So let's go ahead and let's just dig into this article. Just like with the first one, they actually do split this up into three parts, so we may go a little longer than normal. So the article starts off with theaters back open and people returning to the movies, we're starting to get a more complete picture of the post-pandemic box office and what to expect as the industry continues to recover from coronavirus. Thanks to delays of almost every single major 2020 release, massive theater closures, and capacity restrictions, the 2020 box office took a massive hit, one from which the industry may never fully recover. That one I will give them, but we're going to have to wait a couple more years to really truly assess the damage and whether or not they bounce back. Right now, this claim of the 2020 box office took a massive hit, one from which the industry may never fully recover. Right now it's a little too early to make that judgment call. Let's wait until about 2023, 2024, and then we can ultimately judge it. But getting back to this, even so, there's been some major wins in the 2021 summer box office, showing some encouraging signs, but also indicating what to expect from other big releases coming out in the near future. Since the industry saw a massive drop, it's not practical to compare post-pandemic box office performance to the already declining audience of the pre-pandemic box office, meaning the newest box office hits like A Quiet Place Part 2, Fast and Furious 9, and Black Widow exist in an entirely new context and behave in ways they wouldn't have in the pre-pandemic market. Things are sure to continue evolving for some time, but we have enough of a snapshot of the new normal to have an idea of what to expect for other upcoming releases, provided there's no major fluctuations in the near future. Ideally, the box office will continue to trend upwards, but A Quiet Place Part 2, Fast and Furious 9, and Black Widow provide enough of a foundation to establish a few expectations. And they're not wrong that and I brought this up in the first video that I made, is that the movie theater attending audience has been on a decline ever since around 1999 to 2000. It started right around there, and it's just been going down and down and down just year over year. And I remember ending the video with, COVID did not help movie theaters' problems, but it didn't cause their movie theater attending audience going on the decline for the last 20 years. COVID only exacerbated all of their current underlying issues. But before I tangent on for too long, let's get right into the first point that this article makes. Post-pandemic movie domestic box office openings are way down. Let's get right into this. And there is a lot of, and this section right here is going to involve a lot of numbers, so it's probably going to be a lot longer than the other ones. Some of the findings are obvious, but just because it goes without saying doesn't make it relevant. And that's the fact that post-pandemic box office openings are significantly lower than they were before. A Quiet Place Part 2 is a little hard to compare because the original was a bit of a surprise hit. It was. The original Quiet Place was a sleeper hit. But the opening for the sequel was almost the same as A Quiet Place, coming in just a few million shy, with $47,547,231, but bumped it up over the original to $57,088,948 thanks to a 4-day Memorial Day weekend. A Quiet Place Part Two's opening weekend box office is unique to the list since the longer holiday weekend made it the only movie of the three to outperform its predecessor in ticket sales during its opening week. But accounting for a typical sequel boost, it would have been expected to do much bigger numbers under pre-pandemic circumstances. Now let's get into Fast and Furious 9. Fast and Furious 9's box office performance is a more typical franchise sequel, so its $70,043,165 box office opening weekend is likely a bit more indicative of the kind of drop in opening weekend sales to expect. Fast and Furious 9's opening weekend is the lowest opening for the franchise since the third installment, Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift, which is back before the Fast and Furious franchise's box office had the expectations it's known for today. Yes, I don't believe that the movies really became smash hits until Fast 5, I think, is really when it started taking off, and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson coming into the franchise. But article goes on, Fate of the Furious brought in $107,310,965 in its opening weekend. Now we're getting into the MCU and Black Widow. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is known for its ability to turn almost any character into a major franchise of its own, with the exception of Ant-Man. And Black Widow has been a member of the Avengers from the beginning, so it's fair to expect a big outing from her for her solo movie. Black Widow opened to $80,366,312, which is surprisingly not the lowest MCU opening in recent memory, since both Ant-Man movies opened lower than that. However, Ant-Man doesn't have the same popularity as Black Widow, and that is true. Black Widow, in the context of the MCU, was a lot more popular than Ant-Man was. And you'd have to go all the way back to Phase 1 in Captain America the First Avenger to find another MCU film with a lower opening weekend. Also impacting Black Widow's box office is the fact that it was available streaming on Disney Plus Premier Access, where it brought in another fair chunk. Again, how big that chunk is, we don't fully know because Disney can hide those numbers from us all day long, and there's almost nothing we can do to get them to be public about them. However, since we're examining post-pandemic theatrical industry performance, not the revenue of each individual film, we can ignore the streaming revenue other than the fact that it may have cannibalized a percentage of ticket sales. Do you know what else may have cannibalized a percentage of Black Widow's ticket sales that nobody's bringing up? The fact that Loki was airing around the same time. I believe episodes 5 and 6 came out during Black Widow's opening weekend and second weekend. So you now have a case where the MCU Disney Plus shows, with the popularity of Loki may have in and of itself cannibalized Black Widow because, with early reviews coming out and people kind of saying that the movie was kind of meh, it's like, do I really want to go out of my way to see Black Widow, or do I want to stay home and watch Loki? I'm going to stay home and watch Loki. So I'm not saying that Loki is solely responsible for the cannibalization of Black Widow's box office. I'm just saying that may have also played a role into it. But the article goes on, but it's not a guarantee that those sales would have all been recouped in theaters if Premier Access weren't an option. Besides, with early streaming releases becoming part of the new normal, this is just one more example of factors impacting box office performance. Okay, now after that very long-winded section and, a lot of numbers, we are getting to the second main topic that they're talking about in this article, and that is the post-pandemic box office has big second week drops, but maybe good legs still. Yeah, maybe, depending on how long that movies last in theaters, because movies don't last in theaters as long as they used to. Like, the second week drop-off used to not be that big of a deal, not until movies were getting out of theaters within 4 weeks. I remember a time when movies would stay in theaters for 6, 7, 8 weeks, and then they would be pulled. But again, we're going back like 15, 20 years. But anyway, getting back to this article here, movies aren't only opening lower, they're also dropping faster. Every post-pandemic movie mentioned above saw a second week drop far bigger than its predecessors, despite strong reception for all three films. Before the pandemic, second week drops were usually attributed to poor word of mouth, and that would certainly still be a factor if the movies weren't received well. But in this case, it likely represents a shrinking theater-going audience. Theater attendance has been declining for years prior to the pandemic. As I said, it's been going down since about 1999 to 2000, and from then on, they just never recovered. And 2020 may have been what it took to convince some fence sitters to start staying home more. Personally, I have not gone out of my way to go back to the movie theaters probably since 2009. Now, that doesn't mean that I cut out movie theaters entirely. It's just, there was a lot of movies that I didn't, rush out to go see just because I could just wait for home video. I'm not gonna run out. I'm not gonna go out of my way to see this in theaters because I don't because then if I'm disappointed, I only spend a couple of bucks running it from Redbox or Blockbuster at the time, rather than spend 10, 15, 20 bucks going to see it in theaters. But okay, let's get into the article. And again, we're going Quiet Place Part 2, Fast and Furious 9, and Black Widow. A Quiet Place Part 2 performed the best in this area, only dropping 59% in its first weekend, which may not seem that bad by pre-pandemic standards, with around 60% being the typically expected drop for a summer movie. But considering the first A Quiet Place only saw a 34.4% drop, and the movie saw similarly positive reviews, with A Quiet Place 2 seeing only a little less enthusiastic reviews, the bulk of that drop can be blamed on the post-pandemic market. The first movie did release in April, which isn't quite in range of the summer's expanded 60% average. However, horror movies are also known for commonly seeing drops of 60%. Yes, because most modern-day horror movies are complete fucking garbage. Let's be honest, it's just a bunch of cheap jump scares. It gets a bunch of people in opening weekend, then the movie gets slammed for just, being filled of just a bunch of cheap jump scares, and then nobody else goes to see it. They all wait for home video when horror movies inevitably become dirt cheap, because let's be honest, a lot of modern horror movies, if you wait a few months after it comes out on home video, you can probably pick up a DVD copy of it for $5 or $10. A trend that the first Quiet Place the first Quiet Place dodged that bullet, but again, that was more just there was a lot of good word of mouth at the time. So it's clear there's a number of factors at play here, but all things considered, A Quiet Place Part 2 saw a relatively solid second weekend drop and has actually seen even better performance proportionally in the weeks since. Conversely, both Fast and Furious 9 and Black Widow saw second weekend drops just north of 67%. For Fast and Furious 9 box office, the 67% drop is certainly the worst in the franchise, but surprisingly not by a lot. Most movies in the Fast and Furious franchise hover around 60% already, and the majority of those movies opened in April, just before the summer season's heavier drops. Also looking at the drop from week 2 to 4 for each movie in the franchise, Fast and Furious 9's drop is far more comparable to the rest of the franchise, and even better than some of the other Fast films. I do know that Fast and Furious 9 has not been received particularly well, even by fans, and some actually slamming it for, going way off the deep end with its logic, even for a Fast and Furious film. But that's... if I were to dedicate this entire video to how the Fast and the Furious franchise went off the rails, we'd be here for probably about the next hour, and I don't want to do that right now. Okay, here we go. Black Widow is a bit of a different story. Marvel's notoriously strong box office performance rarely sees a drop exceed 60%, only passing it on 4 occasions. The Incredible Hulk, Captain America First Avenger, Spider-Man Homecoming, or as I like to call it, Spider-Man Shit Coming, and Ant-Man and the Wasp, with Spider-Man Shit Coming 62.2% box office drop, marking an MCU pre-pandemic high point. The movie only just ended its second week in theaters, so we can't compare past the second weekend just yet, but it'll be curious to see if Black Widow's post week 2 performance is as strong relative to its predecessors and the other post-pandemic films that we looked at. Again, I think the problem with Black Widow that they're not addressing is that the movie came out at the wrong time. It really should have come out 2016 at the earliest, 2017 at the absolute latest, because at the end of the day, we all know how Black Widow's story ends. Spoilers for Avengers Endgame, she dies. But now let's get into the third and final point of this article. And this is basically the conclusion. How the pandemic impacted summer blockbusters so far. While the first 2 weeks have suffered a lot with A Quiet Place Part 2, Fast and Furious 9, and Black Widow all seeing smaller openings and big second weekend drop-offs, the encouraging revelation here is how strong the post-week 2 performance is for both A Quiet Place Part 2 and Fast and Furious 9. This proves a higher level of elasticity with theater audiences than expected, and instead of staying home altogether, some of the audience has simply shifted to later weeks, giving the movie surprisingly strong legs if the first 2 weeks are excluded. The interesting detail to watch throughout the box office continued recovery will be whether or not the post-week 2 legs are strong across the board, or if A Quiet Place and Fast and Furious 9 are outliers. In my opinion, I think that they're going to be outliers going forward, because you have to also keep in mind that a lot of people were forced into these lockdowns for the last year and a half. So it could be that these movies just came out at the right time and people just itching to get out of the house. They're going to go see anything that they can. I do expect that we are going to see a cool off, but again, that's also too early to call. We're going to have to wait for more data to come out. Also, if those drops aren't isolated, then as audiences continue to return to theaters, will these post-weekend 2 drops increase as weekends 1 and 2 grow, meaning the audience is shifting to earlier weekends as they get more comfortable with the associated larger crowds, or will the post-pandemic box office simply see improved legs as mild compensation for lower openings? Again, in order to really answer that question, more data needs to come out, so we're not going to really be able to answer that until probably January or February of next year, January or February of 2022. Okay, here's the last paragraph. Here's how the article concludes. There's still a lot to learn about the impact of coronavirus on the theatrical movie's box office. Audiences are definitely returning, just not in the same numbers quite yet, and it's not clear how close they'll ever get to pre-pandemic levels. The one silver lining, at least in the case of A Quiet Place Part 2 and Fast and Furious 9, is that the performance of the week 3 onwards seems to have seen a boost, showing at least some audiences are willing to change their behavior to maintain their movie-going habit instead of abandoning theaters entirely, which bodes well for the continued box office recovery. And that's how the article ends. So guys, like I said at the very beginning of this video, I am actually working on my own follow-up to these three videos that I have made. No, I am not just going to read another Screen Rant article. I'm actually doing a little bit of research, and basically I think all of this, when you're talking about the post-pandemic box office, I think what you're ultimately seeing is this, this period in art that I know what I'm going to call it, the corporate period. I'm going to call this, period in art history as the corporate period. Now, to be fair, I am not the first person to call this particular period in art history the corporate period. I personally got that from David Stewart, and he may have gotten it from somewhere else. I don't remember if he said so or not. But I am going to be doing my own research over the next probably week or two. So expect to see that follow-up from me, and I'm going to be examining not only the film industry, but also the gaming industry, and how, COVID basically just accelerated the corporate period in art ending. So guys, if you stuck around for this long, thanks so much for doing so. I know I've gone on a lot longer probably than I needed to, but I had to get that announcement in there. And if you guys have been following me long enough, I am terrible at ending these, so I will just see you guys next time.